Welcome to the week that was on Deadline Detroit. I'm Craig Fahle. Thanks very much for being here today. As always, Alan Lengel, of course, editor here at Deadline Detroit, is here, and Nancy Derringer is also with us as well once again. And it's been an interesting week. We'll talk. You know what? We're going to go local first.
Okay.
Because I can't stomach going to crazy and very stable yet.
Okay, got it.
We're not going to go there yet.
All right.
We're going to go to Lansing first because something that has dogged the state of Michigan for as long as I've been covering politics in the state is auto insurance. This is something that nobody's agreed on. A fix has been elusive. Apparently, as of today, just a couple of hours ago, an agreement was reached that ticks off a lot of boxes for a lot of different people.
Yes, it is a classic bipartisan compromise, which is what we're supposed to be working toward because in our polarized society. Go ahead.
Well, it seems to me that everybody that's got a dog in this fight is basically going to lose something.
Right.
The insurance companies are taking a hit. One, they are not going to be able to use non-credit factor or non-driving factors in determining rates, so that things like your sex, your marital status, job status, credit score, zip code, all cannot be used.
Yeah, and that's good news.
Zip code is huge, particularly here in Detroit. I mean,
right.
It's huge.
That can at least make a little bit of sense. You can say, all right, if more cars are being stolen in your zip code, you're going to have to pay more. However, I've never understood what credit score has to do with what you pay in insurance.
I know exactly
this
what
is
it's
not
for.
a credit, but it's not a credit. It's not extended on credit. You either pay for it or you don't. What you tell me?
Well, it's an algorithm that they have
this.
used, and again, if somebody in the insurance industry wants to call up and tell me that I'm wrong, fine. But based on some conversations I've had in the past with people who work in the insurance industry, it's an algorithm they put together that determine the likelihood that you might file a claim if you're in an accident. They think you're more likely if you have bad credit to file a claim because maybe you need money, maybe whatever.
Yeah.
So they factor that into the whole equation.
I see.
And if you look at the numbers of where the suits are filed, Detroit has been very, very high. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One, lack of health insurance for a lot of folks.
Right.
But two, I mean, look at all the attorneys that are advertising here in this community.
Sure.
And they're everywhere.
Right.
Okay, let's talk
It's
about
interesting. There's always, one of the issues also factored in that there's a lot of uninsured motorists in Detroit.
Yep.
But you can't tell me that if people, Southfield, Warren, even West Bloomfield, even in the higher end zip codes, if they were having to pay $5,000 or $6,000, you might see some more. You'd see a greater number of people uninsured in the suburbs as well.
Oh, agreed.
It's insane. I mean, to pay $5,000-$6,000 a year for car insurance is just
and it's like, and not everybody's going to be happy with this. In fact, just about everybody's not going to like it. The healthcare industry is not liking the fact that there's going to be a rate schedule now that they're going to put forth as to sort of capping what you can pay for certain procedures, bringing them more in line with what health insurance companies pay for the same procedures, which is a big deal. And that's a huge driver in medical costs for the system and what has led to increased rates here in the state. Something that, of course, Mayor Duggan's been talking about for years on this whole thing. So they're not going to like that. The insurance companies aren't going to like that either because that's going to limit how much the awards are because they're not going to be as expensive. So everybody's going to lose something on this deal, but consumers look like they're going to get a guaranteed rate decrease. We don't know the percentages yet. I'm still doing some research on it, but this is a pretty significant change.
And that's what most people want. I mean, and to do away with how screwed up the system is, this is, I believe, the only place in the country where you can buy a 1-week auto insurance policy, outside of a rental, renting a car. But
and really, when you look at it, I mean, how many places in the state, aside from Detroit, where people sometimes determine they are not going to live in the city because insurance rates are too high?
It has prevented me thus far. I mean,
I don't know of any other city,
factor.
any other community where people have made a determination based on insurance rates, whether they're going to live there or not. But in Detroit, it is certainly a legitimate
or that you're gonna, if you don't have the back pocket solution of keeping your car registered with your parents in the suburbs or your brother in the suburbs.
Yeah. But
I'd like to extend my suburban address to you, and you can go ahead.
I think it's also potentially insurance fraud if you put a claim there, and if they find out, your claim is negated, which is dangerous if you're talking about a lot of money.
It is very much an insurance fraud, but people do it anyway to save thousands of dollars. They figure it's worth it.
Yes. And it's really...
Now, here's what they're talking about. 5 different options for people to buy when it comes to PIP. So you can still have you can still have the option for unlimited lifetime coverage if you want to. But there's a 10% reduction in PIP coverage if you choose that option that will be part of this legislation. Now, if you get a 20% reduction in your rate for $500,000 in coverage. This is in the PIP rates. I want to make sure that this is not your entire rate because theft and all that stuff still factors in. A 35% reduction if you get a $250,000 cap, a 45% reduction for a $50,000 in coverage. And then if you're a senior citizen or you have Medicare or private insurance that will cover this stuff, it's a 100% reduction in your PIP charges. So those are significant changes. PIP is a huge part of the bill. And like I said, not everybody's going to be happy with this. In fact, all of the special interests that have been basically preventing us from getting anything done on this, everybody's giving up something. I'm shocked. I haven't seen this type of cooperation in a long time in politics.
You're right. And that is, that's a powerful financial incentive to zero out your PIP coverage, which I think a lot of the objection is going to be around poorer people, who have crappy health insurance, if any at all, and are not on Medicaid for whatever reason or Medicare, and decide that they just don't need it, and then have an accident. And you have problems.
It's kind of shocking how quickly this has all come together.
I know.
Who do we credit that? Is it the pressure from the mayor, from Dan Gilbert? Is it the new governor? Is it a new legislature? I don't know.
I don't think it's the new legislature. I think it's a combination of all of those factors.
Yeah, I think the public is finally paying real attention to this.
Right.
When you see the rates that people are paying, and frankly, starting last year, or actually, almost 2 years ago now, in the last round of elections last year, you started seeing the billboard campaigns around town talking about how much you're paying compared to neighboring states.
Right.
That got people's attention, and it worked. It got people elected.
Yeah.
And, so some of the votes that you were going to need on the Democratic side all of a sudden materialized as a result of that, and people started looking into it and saying, yeah, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I understand where Brooks Patterson is coming from when he opposes this, saying, look, we need this lifetime, unlimited benefit. You could burn through this pretty quickly. But this does seem like something that your health insurance policy should take over at some point. It just seems natural. And I don't know. Every other state does it this way.
Yeah, and they're fine. I mean, that was the one thing. I'd never even considered this when I moved to Michigan. That was one of the most staggering nasty surprises of the relocation. Of course, in Indiana, the insurance industry kind of controls the legislature, and that's why if you lose a hand in a work accident, they basically cut you a check for $3.50. So it's
$3.50.
No, I'm kidding.
Dollar a finger.
It's like I remember some reporting. Comparing workplace injury compensation in Indiana and other states, very low there, but that's okay.
Thanks to Mike Pence.
That's a tangent. That was before he was
governor.
And it certainly seems as if
when you have blame him anyways.
Yeah.
When you have the Speaker of the House and you have the Senate Majority Leader and the governor all sitting there talking about how we've reached an agreement, making joint statements talking about how big this is.
It's like the old days,
It's amazing.
It
amazing
is.
to me.
I know.
This level of function.
Right.
I didn't say dysfunction.
Right. Yeah.
This level of function is not something that we're used to, and I'm excited to see it. Maybe this leads to something on road funding.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, and that's the next step because she needed this in order to
I agree.
To get through her gas tax, because that's going to be a big bite. And it's not, I've seen the figures. I mean, they say this will cost the average motorist, a couple $100 with an average car getting average mileage, about a couple $100 a year. And if you're saving at least that much on your insurance, it's a wash, and there's hope that you might save a lot more. But
well, let's go from function to dysfunction.
Okay,
because
dysfunction.
One organization that is not working very well right now is Congress. And of course, there is not a lot of cooperation between the executive branch and the legislative branch at this point in time. In fact, zero cooperation, I think, is what we talk about.
Aren't they co-equal?
They're supposed to be, although the president does not seem to agree with that.
Right.
The week started with more stonewalling on the part of the administration in regards to turning over records and judges saying, sorry, Congress does have access to these records. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin suggesting, I didn't realize there was a law that said I shall turn over the tax returns if somebody requests them.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing after another, and it all seems either designed to just drag this out as long as possible, maybe pass the election, or to as Nancy Pelosi said yesterday, goad the Democrats into trying to impeach the president.
Right.
Who would want this?
Don't throw me into the briar patch.
You can imagine
exactly. That's a good one.
You can imagine the conversations that go on in the White House where Steve Mnuchin says, well, Mr. President, the law says that. And he says, I don't care. I want you to do this. And I mean, it was like yesterday where he goes around the room and he says, was I emotional, Sarah?
Yeah.
What do you think? No, I've seen you worse, basically. I've seen you crazier. No, you were. I know when you're crazy.
But who in that situation is going to say, oh, you were totally unhinged?
You were whack.
Nobody's going to. I mean, hey, was I crazy yesterday? Looking right at you. By the way.
Am I crazy now? No, sir.
That's absolutely
It's funny. I put a little posting on my Facebook right after he declared himself extremely stable genius. And I sort of reverted to an old joke, and it goes like this. I said, Trump declares himself an extremely stable genius. As a joke might go, Mr. President, to Sarah Sanders, you're an extremely stable genius. To you, you're an extremely stable genius. To an extremely stable genius, you're no extremely stable genius.
We're gonna get you your own tight. You got to work on that tight five. You know,
Nancy and I were talking about this earlier today, though. Sort of this very stable genius persona. It's almost like Donald Trump is like David Bowie. He just sort of trots out a different persona when it fits the certain situation. So sometimes I'm a tough guy. I'm the toughest guy in the world, and the military guy, and I'm
the best president.
And now I'm a very stable genius.
I'm the most transparent president we've ever had
in history.
I've accomplished
I don't do
more
cover-ups. I said, unless it's involving porn stars, and then you cover everything up.
Can we see your taxes? No, you can't see those taxes. Can we look at your financial records? Nah, you can't look at those.
But I'm the most transparent president we've ever had.
Did you sleep with a porn star? I don't know anything about that. I mean, this is don't give me that crap. But,
it's been that kind of a week, and then of course Nancy Pelosi then makes a statement about Donald Trump and suggesting that
he had a tantrum. Didn't you call him?
That was post. That was after he stormed out of the meeting the other day.
Oh, that one.
When they were supposed to, again, Infrastructure Week lasted about an hour. Not even. About 15 minutes, I think, is what Infrastructure Week lasted this year. It's like, darn, so close.
When he's out of office, I hope somebody, we just have Infrastructure Week at some point. Because that's it's like the running joke of the thing that, it's like we're starting Infrastructure Week, and by Tuesday, inevitably, Infrastructure Week has been overtaken by events, shall we say.
Infrastructure Week. And, this is not a small need in this country.
No, it's an enormous need.
An enormous need. We were just talking last week about how it might take 100 years to repair all the bridges in Michigan that need it.
It's so significant for the infrastructure of our country, which, trucks, going across the country, transporting goods, but also jobs. I mean, the infrastructure creates so many jobs. It's a great thing for the economy.
We're looking down the road at the advent of the autonomous car age, right? Okay, autonomous cars are going to need things like sensors in pavement and sensors in road, along roadsides, and a lot of infrastructure upgrades in order for them to safely navigate these highways. And, I don't see anything happening on that score.
Well, not at the moment.
Not at the moment,
Not at the moment. I mean, there was a rare moment of bipartisanship, though, that happened in Washington this week. Even the president and Nancy Pelosi were on board. They agreed to a disaster relief package, $19 billion to help places like Texas that have been flooded and other places where there have been natural disasters.
Puerto Rico.
Yeah,
not that. No,
Puerto Rico's American.
Come on,
I help those foreigners.
We sent them some paper towels. They're fine. Anyway, go ahead.
So anyway, but President Trump wanted this to happen. He needed this to happen. I mean, frankly, there's been so much dysfunction in Washington that this was actually something that was a small goodwill gesture on everybody's part to say, all right, we at least can do the stuff that really matters, helping people that have been hurt by this stuff. But, of course, the president tried to get some wall funding and threatened to veto this if he didn't get more funding for border security. Nancy Pelosi called his bluff on it, and he backed off. And they had a deal. And she said, great, we'll pass this. We'll get it to you. Well, apparently, one Republican congressperson, a guy named Chip Roy out of Texas, voted to block it. He's now worried about what it does to the deficit.
Oh, the deficit. Oh, he's worried about the deficit. That's so cute.
So,
oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So the members aren't there right now because of the Memorial Day holiday. And if they know that it's going to be, quote unquote, unanimous consent and everybody signs off on it, they don't actually have to have a vote. And it would have gone through and the money could have started flowing next week.
Yeah.
Now it's all been postponed till after the break. we'll see if that does anything. But
Texas, boy, that's a state that
don't
never
think-
gets hit by F5 tornadoes or
Let's hope the guy's not
catastrophic
from
flooding or
Houston.
hurricanes
I
or
mean-
anything like that. Yeah.
Right.
So it's just one of those things that they can't get out of their own way right now on anything. But yeah, the Infrastructure Week meeting was quite humorous.
Entertaining. It's
Yeah.
entertaining.
Entertaining. And then, of course, the back and forth that has been going on now, the name calling is distracting from a lot of other things that are happening. But, you know, he's calling himself a very stable genius. She's saying that there's something wrong with him. And
She
then
needs an
he's saying
intervention.
something
And then-
wrong with her.
Well,
She's not the same. I've been watching her. I know she's
Crazy
not the
Nancy,
same.
she moves her
Crazy
hands.
Nancy, she doesn't get trade deficit. She doesn't get the whole trade thing.
Well, and is there something that's a little ironic about the fact that he's talking about how she doesn't understand how trade works as he's basically talking about a bailout bill for farmers that are getting screwed over by the tariffs?
I know. Well,
You know what I find?
I've run out of my outrage supply is completely bone dry. I'm pinging on fumes. I no longer have a sense of humor about any of this. I've started to fall into despair, which is a mortal sin if you were raised a nice Catholic like I was. Despair is a mortal
Is
sin.
it really?
Yes, it is.
Well, that just shows your lack of faith, I suppose.
I guess so. Go ahead.
I was going to say the concern about the truthfulness of this president is the scariest part is if we come to a international crisis with Iran or something, and we want to be supportive of our government, whatever action it might take, we don't believe anything he says. Right. So when he comes out and says the Iranians are doing this, I mean, before he was saying, well, the Iranians may use proxies to attack U.S. interests, and other people are saying, well, he may be overstating that. It's like, how do we stand behind, our government or our president when we don't believe anything he says?
Well, here's one thing though that I will say. John Bolton is the one that's leading a lot of this charge on the foreign affairs front when it comes to
Right.
things like Iran and what we should be doing about the quote-unquote threat that Iran poses at this point in time. I think Trump is even calling him on his BS on that a little bit. I mean, the other day he said, I don't want to go to war with Iran. And he's just
John
never
Bolton
trusted
is a
that
scary dude.
Yeah, and he's never trusted that mustache. Remember, because they actually put him forward during the transition as for the job he has now, but H.R. McMaster ended up taking it. And I remember they said that Trump just didn't trust him because he just thought that mustache was ridiculous. P.S.
Who knows what
it is ridiculous.
Who knows what's going on under that mustache?
Mustache of destiny.
Let's move on. And I actually want to talk about this story that's on Deadline Detroit this week, and it's up there right now, as a matter of fact. The director of Detroit's 911 operation has been removed. And this is a story about the power of journalism, I think. Ross Jones from Channel 7 has been chasing this story for months, taking a look at Detroit's performance when it comes to answering 911 calls. What is the response time? How long does it take you to even get through somebody in an emergency?
Right, sure.
The numbers are pretty appalling.
Mm-hmm.
I had the experience. I was driving down the freeway, and there was a car on fire, and I called 911, and I originally, got put on hold.
Really?
And, yeah, and it's. I mean, it's an issue. It's we expect 911 like it's an emergency. Well, they're telling you, well, it's not quite an emergency.
I called 911 once when on a very windy day when one of these temporary highway signs that says like construction had blown over into the outside lane. Okay, so and it's flat, so it's not the kind of thing you're going to see from a distance. But if you run over it, you could easily lose one or more tires.
So
right?
it's like driving on the roads in Michigan.
So I called 911 to and I had the mile marker. I knew exactly where it was, and you know what I got? Just silence.
Oh, right.
I mean, like a guffaw. Listen to this one.
Yeah.
I'm surprised she didn't put me on speaker so I could entertain the entire office. Calling about
Take
stuff
a look
on
at
the
this.
road.
What? You're being held up, but you haven't been shot? Call back when you're shot.
Yeah. Speaking of shots, 7 people over the last 24 hours in the city of Detroit.
Right.
That's also another
And
story
one
that
fatal.
we've got up on
Right.
Deadline.
Sure.
That is something that, I mean, you can say what's happening in Detroit is there's a renaissance happening here, recovery in a lot of neighborhoods, but, we have yet to get a handle on gun violence in this community in any reasonable way, shape, or form.
Right.
I'm not sure anybody can solve it, but, I mean, weeks like this and days like this are really, really disconcerting.
Yes,
Right.
and
It's
it's
scary.
warm now, and people are going to be outside more, run into each other. I saw the ATV crackdown is is going to be happening. That'll be interesting to watch that play out.
Did you see some of the
'Cause
video
that was one
from
of the
that?
shooting was
Some of the video from that where there's the police cars and the ATV guys are just goading the police into chasing
Right.
them.
Oh,
Right.
Because
yes.
the 5-year sentence that the state trooper got for killing the kid on the ATV.
Right.
They're not happy with that, but there's going to be some sort of a conflict that arises from
Right.
these things because they are getting nuts out there.
This is a very interesting street culture too. I was coming home. Sometimes I take the surface street way back from when the freeways are clogged, and I saw a kid come around the corner in front of me and do like a 12 o'clock wheelie on his dirt bike for a long stretch. I mean, it was an impressive wheelie, but I mean, he wasn't looking around to see if there were cops around. That's just kind of the way they roll. So literally roll.
It is slightly lawless.
Slightly, yeah, slightly lawless.
bit,
Yeah,
But it is growing in popularity. I mean, technically these are not legal to ride on the street.
no, not ATVs.
no.
Some dirt bikes are, but I don't think this one even had a license plate on it. But
No. But
yeah.
mini bikes.
It's hard
and
to
you
tell
start to
because
see
his
it.
rear fender was like pointing down. Go ahead.
But I'm just wondering, what's going to be the result of that? Is this the kind of thing that if the police do crack down, that it earns the goodwill of citizens, or are people going to look at this as an unnecessary crackdown when you have other problems like shootings to deal with?
Right.
Well, but wasn't one of the shootings last night at an ATV event?
Yeah, but-
so there is. Yeah, it was some kind of
Causation,
ATV street
the whole
party.
causation
Yeah,
argument.
Exactly.
I mean,
I think you're going to
I
see.
have a feeling
we
drinking was probably involved at
yeah.
some point.
Oh, you're kidding. Yeah,
we
right.
we see that. I mean, we've seen this over many years where there's suddenly a sudden outburst of violent weekend where we have multiple homicides, and it's a reminder that more needs to be done. That the safety net has to go broader beyond Midtown and downtown and Corktown, and not that things don't happen there, but they don't happen with any near
Right.
frequency.
Well, and the other thing that cops will tell you, and I don't know if this is because they don't want to admit, they want to deflect the blame, but they'll tell you, and it's true, that most people who are victims of homicide are killed by somebody they know. It's often somebody who lives in the same house with them. It is the hardest crime of all to really get your arms around because it is so personal and it is so domestic. And it,
Sure.
and it
But that also makes us, it sort of pacifies people by saying, don't
does.
worry about it. You're not going to get killed.
you're
You
in
don't
a
know
good-
anyone who's a murderer.
yeah, if you're in a good marriage, your husband's not going to
don't
kill
worry.
you.
Your
No,
friend's
you're right.
not going to, bust a cap,
Yeah.
during a card game because you called them a name. But it's still a great concern, and some homicides can be avoided.
Yes.
I mean, some particularly guys who are out there with multiple shootings on the record. I mean,
Yeah.
it's incumbent to catch them, and
Yeah, knuckleheading on the street is often where that stuff starts.
Well, speaking of Detroit and its rebirth, shall we say? I know people hate that term. I just said it on purpose. I'm just messing around
Spurious.
here. Not a good week.
whatever.
Not a good week for Chris Ilitch.
Ooh,
The
boy,
Ilitch,
no.
The Ilitches continue to sort of step in it a little bit over what's going on in the district. And, the city, of course, responded by putting a performance bond on the Ilitches for the Hotel Eddystone project, which basically what that is the Ilitches have to take out a bond from an insurance company or a lender. And if they don't meet these benchmarks, then the city gets the money to finish the project if they don't get it done. That's
Right.
how that works. This is not.
It's not a municipal bond.
Not a
It's
municipal bond.
private bond.
So explain to me. So the city doesn't they just take over the project. They don't take over the
Yeah,
It's
but the money from
financed
the money
out of
from the
the-
bond would be used to pay for the finishing of the
finish
project.
the
It's basically a
project.
guarantee that they're going to do it, and that was a pretty significant step that the Downtown Development Authority took the other day. But then
Well,
Chris
it's about
Ilitch,
time.
Chris Ilitch gave a couple of interviews to John Gallagher at the Free Press, who I talked to yesterday on Deadline Detroit, and of course as well
Cranes.
as Cranes, and made the statement that, well, we don't have good transit here, so where else are all these people going to park when they come down here? And everybody said that that's what they wanted all along, was a sea of parking lots around the arena. And did he let slip what his actual hand is?
Yes, I think so. I mean, is that
We
a
have
real
no intention
question?
to build these
Because,
bustling neighborhoods
of
we
course
promised
not.
you.
We're going to build parking lots.
We're
And I
doing the
think
Eddystone
I-
only
there's
because you're dragging us kicking and screaming.
Exactly.
I think what's happened is that the Ilitches were given carte blanche for so long, and and the city of Detroit with this inferiority complex said, do whatever you want to do, trample on us, whatever, take what us, cheat us out of whatever you owe us from TV revenues from the Joe and stuff like that. And now Detroit is a legitimate place to invest, and there are a lot of people
changing
who are,
the atmosphere.
Yeah, and so they are still treating Detroit like the stepchild that they think
they
it
still
is.
have to. They still have to have. They have to bargain from a position of strength, essentially, because they have strength now. The city,
more
city does.
Right.
strength,
more strength. I'm taken back to probably one of the best single quotes about this city that I've ever read in a news source. And I think it was in the Free Press a few years ago. And I remember who said it because I kind of sort of know this guy, Jerry Bellinger, who used to own the Park Bar.
Sure.
And he does a little, does a little ad hoc, small scale developing himself. And he said something, I'm paraphrasing, there has never been one set of rules that applies to everybody in this town. There has always been the billionaire rules and the everybody else rules. And he
was talking about the parking lots, I think.
I think he was. He was talking about the
because
landscaping on the parking lots.
Yeah,
but I mean, that was so.
He had plenty of parking for his clubs over there.
Yeah.
And nobody was allowed to use them unless they paid illage.
Right. Exactly.
So
and
that was something I think that peeved him a little bit.
Well, but also, I mean, he's absolutely right. I mean, this is. I mean, look at all the red carpet that has been laid out for the Illiches and the Gilberts and the Maroons in this city. And there's practically speaking, yes, billionaires have way more leverage that they can bring to the table. But at the same time, if people don't know that the system is fair, then they stop believing in the system.
Well, and interestingly enough, you mentioned the Maroons. Of course, they got a bunch of property in exchange for the property they own for this Fiat Chrysler expansion.
Yeah.
It's one of those things.
A lot of money.
City's damned if you do, damned if you don't on that one. You need the jobs.
Right.
I mean, if you turn anybody that turns down that, because Chrysler can go anywhere they want. I mean, they could build out in the country somewhere, and everybody, be
right. Sure.
Those where
I
those
think
jobs
it's
are.
big. It's a
big
huge
thing. Announcement.
When Mitt Romney was running for president, he was saying, "Hey, let's face it, the manufacturing jobs are not coming back to this country, and here it is.
Yeah.
We've got some manufacturing jobs who are that are coming back.
Good jobs too." What else? We were out last night, and one of the people we were with quoted his landlady in this case, and apparently there's a clause in this land swap deal with the Maroons that says they get like an $11 million bonus if any of these properties that they're getting in return don't have clear titles.
Right.
And she's like, well, then he's getting the $11 million because there probably isn't a single.
I know a little something about title in this community. So,
and it's like there's no way they're getting clear title on all that stuff.
Well,
so there you go.
You can do it. You can quiet the title, and if they can do that, then they'll be out of it.
Okay.
That's what you do. That's what that's called. Hey, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I know your parking's about to expire, so if Nancy actually has to answer her phone, it's not her being rude. It's just doing the Detroit thing, paying your parking,
saving $45.
That's right. That's right. This is a cost-saving measure for Deadline Detroit.
Save $5.
A couple of stories that were on the site that got a lot of traction, and we'll do the music one last, but I want to talk about this. A story that you wrote, Alan, about the FBI files on the Giacalone brothers and their relationship to Jimmy Hoffa all these years later. I mean, this stuff goes back to the 60s and 70s, and we are still absolutely fascinated by the Italian mob and especially their ties to the labor movement back in the day. What did we learn from these?
Our thing.
We just like doing the accent, right? Is that it? Yeah, Jimmy two times.
I thought a couple of the more fascinating highlights from there was one that the Giacalone brothers, Vito and Anthony, who were they weren't the godfathers of Detroit, but they were the face.
They were up there. Yeah.
They were sort of the John Gottis. They liked the publicity. They liked the tough guy image, and they were buddies with Jimmy Hoffa. And they had relationships, with him. And at the same time, there were FBI files saying the Giacalone brothers are planning to break in Jimmy Hoffa's apartment in Washington when the Hoffas are down vacationing in Florida and break into his safe, which is interesting. They must have thought
friends
there must
don't
be
do friends like that.
Yeah, there must be something there. And the other thing
all the money that they steered towards him.
Right. What was going on in a safe? Jimmy Hoffa's got a safe.
You didn't pay your dues this month.
And so that's an interesting thing. And I mean, for a long time, for decades and decades, the mob couldn't get loans for casinos and stuff from regular banks, so they went to the Teamsters and got loans.
Pension funds.
They went to the pension fund. They got a $10 million loan or whatever.
We all saw Goodfellas. We remember that.
Yeah.
Casino. That was the one. Casino was one.
And the other thing I thought was interesting, and unfortunately, there was a lot of redactions in there. There were pages of redactions, which if I was able to get as much good stuff as I did without the redactions. Imagine what was in the redactions.
Yeah.
But the other thing was that the mob was trying to step up its game in the city again. You know, there were crackdowns, and there was a change with the police chief and the mayor being Jerome Kavanaugh, who was supposed to be the Democratic hopeful, the next John Kennedy, the next JFK. And they suspected that he might be on the take, and they wrote in a note saying, you know, he seems to be living beyond the means of somebody who's making a salary, you know, a mayor's salary. And yet they said, we don't have enough to start doing a whole background check on his finances. We feel like there's not enough there. But there were always rumors of Jerry Kavanaugh being in bed with them. But, you know, there were other things, and there was something I did not include where the Giacalones took a witness in a case, in a criminal case, and took this woman and sent her to New York, and she hid out in someone's apartment in New York for 2 weeks, and then she came back, and she said she did it because she was worried she might get killed by the Giacalones if she didn't. But so there's a lot of intrigue in the whole thing, and just the whole secrecy of, you know, one of the Anthony Giacalone supposed to be flying to him and another guy whose name was redacted, flying to California to meet some women, to meet two women. And so they were to fly from City Airport to Chicago. And from Chicago, they were going to use alias names to fly. And then the thing was, if for some reason they figured out that the women or them were being, you know, under surveillance, they were going to call the women and say, don't bother coming. And so, I mean, it was just a lot of interesting little, you know.
But think about it. That's stuff you could get away with back then, flying under an alias.
Yeah.
You just come in. What's your name? John Smith.
Right.
Doesn't work anymore.
John Doe. It was like, it reminded me on Christmas Day, I was interviewing a guy at the American Coney Island for a story at the Detroit News, and I'm doing the whole interview, and we're sitting at the counter. At the end, I say, can I get your name? And he says, yes, John. I go, John? Yeah. And last name, he goes, Doe. Oh, okay.
All right, last. You know, we do know that for some reason, all things Detroit seem to be extremely popular in England. Think about, you know, the White Stripes were much more popular in London than they ever were in Detroit at the time that they were playing. They blew up over there. And for some reason, anything out of Detroit seems to become popular in England. And we just put this up there today. Eminem and Madonna. Yeah. Huge over there, like ranking up there with people like the Beatles.
Beyond the Beatles.
I know.
mean, they basically, the official charts company put together a list of, over the many years, of the top singles, sales of records. And you have Elvis Presley's number 1, which is no surprise. But you have Madonna's number 3. You have Eminem as number 7. The Beatles are only number 10.
Yeah.
The Rolling Stones are further. They're number 23.
They're 23 on this one. But the fact that Eminem, and I've known who he is for a long time and know it, but there's 32 songs that charted in England by Eminem. 32, and I couldn't name 32 Eminem songs.
I could name about 5 Eminem songs.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah, exactly. True. I mean, I
did Eminem at karaoke a few years ago.
Did you really?
You know.
What song?
Which one?
Lose
Yourself?
No, Without Me.
Well, there you go.
It was, and I actually
sure it was
did a little
spectacular.
I did a little intro too. It was quite something. But anyway,
Madonna, 63 songs that charted in England, which is amazing.
And that's 63 is kind of amazes me as well.
Exactly. Well, now here's the great part though, because you said we went from 1 to 3. Nobody's going to know number 2. Well, some people might. If you watch The Young Ones, which is a show that I used to watch on MTV late at night. It's a British comedy show. But they always made fun of this guy, Cliff Richard.
Yeah.
Cliff Richard, number 2 on the list. 68 charting hits in England. That is amazing.
He is the Elvis of England, and on this side of the pond, hardly anybody is.
Elton John was number 8. I mean, tied for 8.
Yeah. But as I pointed out to you guys before we started shooting, the Beatles' career effectively was a decade,
Yes.
I mean, you can say, the Hamburg years, whatever. Madonna's been making records since 1983. Eminem's 1998. 98 around there, 99. I mean,
Right.
these are these
2 good decades.
careers. I mean, pop music careers last a lot longer than this.
And I think also, I mean, we're talking about singles here, so it's easier to download a single on your phone now.
True.
Than it was
Right.
for the Beatles.
But Cliff
where they
Richard
had
started
the-
back in, he's 78 years old now. So
Is he
Oh
really?
yeah,
Oh my
absolutely.
gosh.
Well,
Yeah.
it's just
And but he's not as hot as Tom.
And David
Jones.
Bowie was
Sorry.
there number 12.
Tom Jones can get it any day, and I know he's
well,
like pushing 80
given
now,
given
too.
how popular PBS seems to think the guy is, I was surprised I didn't see this on the British / British Isles list of people. That would be Daniel O'Donnell, who does all the PBS special. Oh, don't. You get to look him up now.
Okay, I guess I have to. This is
Sorry
why,
about
I
that,
don't watch
Rich,
enough PBS.
but I never liked that guy. That's from Mr. Homburg. All right, thanks everybody. Alan Langle, Nancy
Thank
Derringer,
you.
thanks very much. Michael Lucido, we appreciate him engineering the
Thanks.
broadcast once again. And
Everybody
I just
have
want
a
to let
good-
folks know that Michael and I are headed up to Mackinac Island next week for the annual policy conference. I'm going to be live streaming interviews all day Wednesday and Thursday, doing some special features as well. The podcast will be coming from up there. I'm booking interviews left and right. We've got all kinds of people.
And you're staying on a boat?
No, we're not staying on the boat.
Oh, you're not staying on the
No,
boat.
but we're
Okay.
going to probably film on the boat.
Okay.
So that
good.
should be kind of fun.
That should be fun. I hope you have good weather.
It's never,
never know.
you never
I know.
know. But it's more, here's the one thing. Some people go up there and they have fun. Other journalists, when they go up there, actually do a lot of work because
Yeah.
there's a ton of stuff to cover.
Yes.
So, I told Michael, I said, yeah, it's exciting, but you'll be tired.
I heard one say a couple weeks ago that it was the worst week of his year. So, so even the Grand Hotel can't compensate for it. So there you go.
Well, there you
Yeah.
go. But anyway, just wanted to let you know that we'll be doing that. So look for that coverage all next week. We're really looking forward to it, and I'm excited to be able to bring it to you. Thanks for watching The Week That Was here on Deadline Detroit. I'm Craig. Have a great weekend, everybody. Enjoy the long weekend.